And welcome back to Graphics Card Nightmares right here on JJ's PC Builds. It's great to see y'all back once again. We're going to go ahead and just dive right into it and see what's cooking for this week on graphics cards. It could be interesting, you never know. Alrighty, we're here at the action screen. That way we can see what's going on. We're here on Amazon. Let's see, we got the first one that's contending, 3060 at $300. Everybody knows if they want a 3060, that's up to them. But the thing is this, for $300, you could probably get something better. Now, they do have one here that's an Asus TUF. It's a 7900 XT OC, 20 gigabytes of GDR6, but they got it priced at $913.77. That's a little bit pricey, especially if you want to, get something equal to that, maybe even a little bit better. Would probably be for $999. Would probably be your 4080 Super. That'll probably be something to think about as well. And do stick around to the end to see what my final thoughts are. So we're going to continue to move on. When you buy a graphics card, the thing you want to do is this. You want to be able to get the greatest prices you can that's affordable for you. So looking through with graphics cards, make sure you just don't go through one page of, let's say you want to do just Amazon. Make sure you go through all the pages when it comes to the graphics cards, and then make little mental notes of the pricing and find the best price you can find. Or go through Amazon, Newegg, Micro Center, Jawa, wherever you can find the best deals. I'm sure you can find them. Just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of research, to do what you need to do. Okay, now with the 1060, I'm not really going to elaborate on it because GTX, NVIDIA's already discontinued GTX. So there's no sense even looking at GTX anymore. Now when it comes to the RX for AMD or the RTX for NVIDIA, then, you can go that route. If you want to stay on the cheap and stuff like that, you can find any 8 gigabyte card that's below $300. That seems to be like the go-to when it comes to the pricing now these days. That $300 for a low-end graphics card is usually your minimum. You can find them cheaper if you buy it used, but I would suggest if you want something that hasn't been hammered on or anything else, then I would suggest to stay with new. That's just me. So moving on, we got a 3060 here, 12 gigabytes for $300. I mean, it's $300. They got a 580, third-party seller cards I'm trying to steer away from because I have 2 of those third-party seller cards and the performance is just like crap. I mean, the firmware is not matching with the hardware. I can tell you that. So moving on down the road, if you want to go up $30 more, you can get a 7600 XT with 16 gigabytes. Not too bad. Not too shabby at all. It's AMD, but, it's something to think about. I mean, if you want, let's say you want a 3060 12 gigabytes, I mean, you can go that route for $300. $30 more, you can get yourself a 7600 XT. I mean, performance-wise, to me, 7600 XT... Let's do this. Let's just take a little bit of a sidetrack and let's look up the 7600 XT specs. So we go 7600 XT specs. You can follow along and do this with me while you're watching the video, and you go right here to Tech Power Up, and you go right here and you go down to the relative performance chart. Okay. So way it looks is, now the 6650 XT is $220. Okay, the 2080, price-wise, I don't think so. You got your 4060 here, which is 3% slower. you know, it's not that I say, you know, I'm either AMD or NVIDIA. I love the hardware of both. So I'm impartial when it comes to either AMD or NVIDIA or Intel or any one of the companies. I go by, like I told you all before, I go by what the hardware tells me. Not what the company name tells me, what the hardware tells me. If the hardware is good, I'm going to tell you. If it's bad, I'm going to tell you. Either way, I'm going to tell you. So 7600 XT sits right here at 0%. That means it's just baseline 0%. Now 3060 Ti, let's see. We want to see where a 3060 sits. So we can go back and, you know, I can tell you where a RX 590 sits. You know, I mean, on an average, 3060 Ti, somewhere in there. So if we can't find the 3060 on the relative chart, so we go to the 3060 specs, and you know, we can look right here on Tech Power Up to see where it sits on the chart. So either way, you're gonna find out. See right here where it says the ARC 750, so your 3060 is sitting way below the 6600 XT, and you got your 7600, which is 18% faster, and your 7600 XT, which is 22% faster. Okay, so now looking at this, it's either you want to go 3060, a 3060, or a 7600 XT. I will tell you this: if that's the case and it sits way down here, right here, so you're looking at 18% slower on this chart, and looking right here, you're looking at 22%. So between 18 and 22%. It's hard to factor because the two charts are not matching up. But if it's between 18 and 22% for the 7600 XT, then looks like for $329, for that $29, $30 more on the performance, it's a great deal. So this one would be a great deal for you. Let's move on down the road. I went and got me a GT 730, 4 gigabytes. I can tell you it's not what you think it is. What they did is they took a 1 gigabyte or a 2 gigabyte card, they added maybe 1 or 2 chips to it, and then they made it into a 4 gigabyte card. Okay. Performance wise, it sucks. So don't think about buying it. Let's see, GTS. No, that's 4060 Ti for $384. And like this right here, we can go again. We can go to a 4060 Ti. See, I'm showing you this is because this way you get a good idea of how to spec out your card. This is the 8 gigabyte card. Between the 8 and 16 gigabyte, they're only between 1 and 2% of each other. So really, it really doesn't matter. I mean, looking right here, 4060 Ti 8 gigabyte, and if you're going down towards the 7600 XT, you know, you're looking at 12% faster on this chart here compared to the 7600 XT if you're looking for a Ti version. But that's only 12%. And, you know, going up towards your numbers, you know, if it's telling you a 2080 Ti, which probably is going to be around the same price range, and your 3070s and your 7700 XT, which is a little more pricier, you know, you just go up in the numbers. Okay, let's say you have $500 to spend. Okay, just $500. You can get yourself a 7800 XT, you know, I think, and maybe if you're lucky you can find a 7900 GRE for like $550. But, you know, they got the 4070 Super, which that's about $630. Okay. So, looking at the Super and looking at the GRE, you know, do your math. So, let's go ahead and get out of here. Get out of all these. go back to Amazon and finish off Amazon. But like I said, if you're looking for, like, you know, a good graphics card, you can see the difference between the 4070 Super and the 7900 GRE. The 7900 GRE, their relative performance on rasterization would be about correct. Now, when it comes to ray tracing, now the 7900 GRE might get blown away by the 4070 Super. So, if it all depends on if you're into rasterization. Okay, let's get down to the brass tacks. It's all into if you're into the rasterization. If you're not into ray tracing, you can care less about ray tracing. Then, you know, a card like the 7900 GRE would be a good card. But also, too, the 7800 XT, which I have right here. And that's only $479, between $479 and $499. Okay, if you want to stay below $500 and save yourself a couple bucks, go to the 7800 XT. Performance-wise, you're not losing much performance. You're actually, this will keep up with this card right here. These two, I think, run pretty much equal. So that's the reason why I got both of these cards. They run pretty much equal to each other. See, I'm not a fanboy of NVIDIA, and I'm not a fanboy of AMD. I'm a fan of both. So if I wasn't, I would have had a 4070 Super here, you know, and not the 7800 XT. I would have had all NVIDIA and all AMD when it comes to the process. Well, it comes to the processors, yeah. I mean, I got 3 computers with Intel in it, but they're older generations, but they still run. Don't forget your drinking snacks, by the way. So, let's move on to Newegg and see what they got cooking. Alrighty, let's go over here to Newegg and see what's rolling. We got the 4070 Ti. They got it for $850. I rounded up to the next dollar. So if I see 99s on it, I'm gonna round it up to the next dollar. Basically, you pretty much are doing that anyway. Yeston has come out with some good cards lately, so you might want to check into that. But I'm not into the rainbow kind of cards. I'm into like the blacked out kind of cards, you know, the ones that don't have any RGB or anything else. They're just blacked out. Like this one here is. This one's got one color, one RGB color. You know, I wish they would have made it ARGB and it changed just like, you know, the rest of your fans in your system, but they didn't do that. Power color, you might want to think about that. Doing your fans, you know, give it some kind of life. A little bit, you know, matching it up with your the fans for a customer system, you know, being able to change the colors off of the motherboard, you know, stuff like that. So that might be something you might want to dive into. Zotac, it looks like they got a 4070 Ti Super for $790. Oh, it's not something I'm interested in. 580, 6800 XT is for $490. Like I said, you can get a you can go up to the next gen 7800 XT, get same performance, even greater with the 7800 XT. Like I showed you over here, right here, you can get the same performance, even greater. So I'm not looking at last gen much anymore, is because it's just a waste of your money and waste of time, especially when they got the new generation coming out. I'm not sure about AMD if what's going to be cooking on their generation, but I am keeping my ear to the ground to see what they got coming out, if they got something good coming out for the 8000 series other than integrated graphics. It seems like the 8700G is about basically the graphics that they had come out so far. I hear about, you know, a graphics card in the 8000 series coming out, and then they canceled it, you know, and it's just a big, you know, up and down kind of roller coaster ride, and I'm not about to take that roller coaster ride with my subscribers. I am not going to do that with y'all. 7900 XTX for $979. Yeah. Depends on... like I said, it depends on if you want AMD for rasterization or you want NVIDIA for ray tracing. I'm going to tell you that's just the basic standard. Everybody seems to dismiss the basic standards. So I'm just bringing you to the basic standard of it all. Okay, we're not going to do the fan list because you know that's not a graphics card, that's an accelerator card, and that's not something I'm going to point you in, especially being only 8 gigabytes of an accelerator card. You're not going to be interested in it, so I wouldn't even, unless you're a technical guru that you know how to modify those to make that 8 gigabytes of VRAM to attach to your normal graphics card. You know, me, they should figure out, if they're going to do an accelerator card, how to attach that to integrated graphics. Streamline it to integrated graphics so it gives it 8 gigabytes of VRAM instead of using system RAM for your integrated graphics. AMD, you hear my voice on this. Intel, you hear my voice. NVIDIA, you hear my voice. Well, NVIDIA, I can't say that because they don't do integrated graphics. It's between Intel and AMD. So, either one, hear my voice. If you can plug an accelerator card for cheap into a computer system with integrated graphics like the 8700G, giving it an extra 8 gigabytes of VRAM from that accelerator card, giving it more performance and taking away from, it being attached to the system RAM. I think you would have a better advantage point when it comes to integrated graphics. People would start getting integrated graphics, but they also too would get the accelerator cards to go along with it. So that might be something Intel and AMD might want to look into. So keep moving on. RTX 4070, 559, 560. Still at about around the same price point. Some people, when they first came out, they paid $600 for them. Okay, the 4070 stayed in between 550 and 550 and 600. And some people, want to get the 4070 Super because it's only $39 more when it comes to performance. It's supposed to have 10% more performance than the 4070 itself. So that's moving on down the road. That's if you don't want to wait for the next gen to come out with NVIDIA and AMD, and you just want to get something now. I would suggest to put your heart into looking for a 4070 Super. I have the 4070. I have no problems with the 4070. Ever since I first purchased it to now, I've tested it, everything else. The reason why I like it so much is because it's got the 8-pin power plug. It does not have the 12-volt high power connector that the 4070 Super is going to have. The 4070 itself has the 8-pin connector that you never have a problem with. And you don't have to change power supplies or anything else. It just plug in and play. Download the software from NVIDIA, put it in, the power connection. You can run a normal power supply. You don't have any of that 12-volt high power crap on it. And you're not killing your power supply. And so far, I can tell you, I have not yet moved that connector out of its slot, knowing I can many of times and it's not going to bother it. But I'll tell you what, the connector doesn't heat. I can push this up to 200 watts and not have any issues. They always said back then those 8-pin connectors are only good for 150 watts continuous. Okay, but as they've been making power supplies, the newer power supplies and stuff, they've kind of bumped the rating up to, let's say, about 200. I would say 250 watts to be on the safe. But this graphics card only goes to 200 watts, and I can run it continuous, power draw, 200 watts from that plug, and still, no problem. Which I do anyway. When I play games, I can play games for like maybe 6-8 hours. I'm running this at max, and this graphics card at max, and that plug does not heat at all. So I know I got a good deal. I know I ain't dealing with that 12-volt high power connector. I know that for sure. So, wow. 4080 X3 3W, 16 gigabytes. Oh, it's basically what they're saying is that's a 4080 overclock white edition. So, and they want $1,899. 730, 2 gigabytes, GT 730. Like I told you, with the GT 730, they have them where they're 4 gigabytes of VRAM. These right here are your originals. This is 2 gigabytes of VRAM when it originally came out, and if you get the ones with the 4 gigabyte, you're going to have a problem. So, and plus the software is discontinued on these anyway, so best off to not buy it at all. I don't know why they sell them even for $200. $200. What can you get for $200? That's software that's still active. Well, let's see the 6600, the RX 6600. $20 more, you can get the RX 6650 XT, or you can get yourself the RX 6600 XT. They still got active software. You know, look right here. That's 2 gigabytes. This is 8 gigabytes. Big difference. You know, they got a 6500 XT right here for $159. 55 from 5500 to and up are not bad cards. They're low budget, but it depends on if that's something you just want to get you by until the next gen comes out. But I would save your money. I wouldn't even buy a graphics card. If you've been running all this time off of your system, you're best off to just save and wait. Just keep saving and waiting until that next big thing comes out, and then do your homework on it. You know, watch the reviews. This is where everybody makes the mistake. Watch the reviews on the new graphics cards that come out before you buy them. Okay, what these companies have been doing is they've been shanking the reviewers, and they said, well, we're just going to launch them without doing the review on them. And when that happens, look what happened when they did the 4080 launch. Look what happened when they did the 4080 launch. They did a 4080 Ti and a 4080. Everybody took and roasted NVIDIA for that. I mean, roasted hard. Do yourself a favor. I know everybody wants to get that. As soon as they come out on the market, they're in the stores, you want to buy it right then and there. You're doing that without getting a review on it, you don't know what you're buying. So get a review, get a couple reviews on it before you make your decision to go buy it. I'm sure they'll have it within 30 days, you know, of the first sale. So I don't see them selling out. This is the sellout period. From the time they launch it, for 30 days, they usually got some left over. So they're not really selling them that hot. If they sell them out within 7 days, that'll be a surprise. Unless the manufacturer decided they want to reduce the amount of GPUs that they're going to make this time in order to save on cost. As they do that, they'll say, okay, well, we'll make 60,000. We'll send it around all around the world. And if they run out, then they sold out. That's what they've been doing. So instead of making the normal, like 100 to 200,000 and sending them all over the world, they've only been making less than 100,000, maybe like 60 or 70,000, I would say. And then they send them all over the world, and then they say, oh, we get the next big thing. Boom. Everybody buys it and it sells out. But what happens is, just like with the 4090, the 12-volt high power connector, people saying, oh yeah, there's only like maybe 100 or 200. That's what NVIDIA claimed. Well, that's crap, because from what I've seen from these GPU tech channels, where they rebuild the GPUs, I've seen thousands upon thousands of 4090s going into their shops because of the 12-volt high power connector. Roasting. So, and there's a couple tech channels that's already did a review on it, and their outcome was and they keep saying this, and they need to stop saying this, because it's not the consumer's fault in how they plug it in. If I push my connector all the way into my GPU and it's supposed to lock, I push it in one time. I push it down to make sure it meets, nice and tight. And that's it. I don't do anything else. I leave it there. It doesn't move, so it, and plus the connector sits right around where the glass is, so it kind of holds the connector in place. But the GPU is stationary, it doesn't move. How can the connector pop itself out and cause friction when it's not moving? Only way it would cause friction like that is if the GPU itself was pulling more power than the connector can handle. Common sense. And that's pretty much what happened. The GPU pulled more than the connector could handle and caused it to melt. Like I said, inside those connectors, they have one bus bar for the positive, one bus bar for the negative. And it's about thin as like the fuses for your car. It's about as thick as that, the plates. Now, when you pull too much power from plates like that, what's going to happen? It's going to melt. It's going to get hot, it's going to turn into a furnace, and it's going to melt. I mean, it's common sense that, it's not user error, especially if they're running it at stock. And the connector still melts. It's common sense. Oh my God. It's the reason why I never got a 4090. It's because it's common sense. This is the reason why I never got a 4070 Ti or a 4080 or a 4080 Super or a 4070 Ti Super or a 4070 Super. Okay? I'm not going to take the chance and have that connector melt on me when I have a 4070 that has an 8-pin connector that's trusted. Okay, now if they would have made the connectors as thick as they did for the 8-pin connectors, for the 12-volt high-power connector, you notice how all the 8-pin connectors are individual connectors? They don't go through a bus bar or anything else. They're individually wired to the correct wiring. They're using 22-gauge wiring, and they're trying to run it to one big bus bar, and they're just causing a furnace instead of running them individually. If they would have wired each pin individually with individual wires going from that plug all the way down to your power supply, I don't think they would have had an issue. And that way they could have used 16 gauge on each one of them. Each one of the wires, they could have used 16 gauge. No, they're being cheap. And, actually it's more expensive to do it the way they're doing it. It would have been cheaper for them to do every individual wire with a thicker wire and a thicker pin connector, like they do with the 8-pin. No, they didn't want to do it that way. I would have been happy if they would have put 4 8-pin connectors on there and been done. Didn't need no sense wire or anything else. Put 4 8-pin connectors and been done. And tell everybody, make sure you use at least a 1200 watt power supply. That's what they should have did. They didn't do that. So guess what? It's called you're screwed when you get a 4090. And I know you guys are probably going to roast me for saying that, but I'm telling you the truth. If they would have made the pins individual like they do with the 8-pin connectors, and they did that 12-pin high-power connector like that, made it a little bit bigger, they were more worried about the aesthetic than they were the performance of that connector. They were worried about the aesthetics other than worrying about the performance of the pin on the connector. They tried to do it and show everybody, oh, we can do it this way and make it better. No, you made it worse. I would never, ever, ever use any kind of connector like that. That would open me up for a can of worms. I could even take something that pulls the recommended watts and connect it to each one of those pins like it was connected into the GPU. Just take one of those connectors and, connect something in that will pull the same amount of power that the GPU is pulling and see if it melts. Now, if it melts on the outside, away from the GPU, what do you think the GPU is doing to it? Even at running at stock. You think it's pulling only 400 watts at stock? Hell no. That thing's pulling at least 5 to 550 watts to pull off that little 12-pin connector. It's bullshit. It's crazy that they tell you what it does and it doesn't meet the rating UL specifications. UL has a specification to when it comes to plugging things in. I know they say, well, that's because using it for house current and stuff like that. Well, if you're melting a connector at 12 volts, then that means you're pulling more power off that connector than you are to start your car. Think about it. A starter on a car only pulls, what, 35 amps? And this is pulling at least between 65 and 70 amps off of that connector. Why do you think it melts? There it is. They used cheap plastic, thin plastic. They tied everything together into two powers, which they should have separated all the powers and kept them individually separated. Then they would have never had this problem, but they're never going to wake up to the fact that's the way they should have done their connector, like they did the 8-pin. So, sorry, I had to put that little rant in there because I see these other channels sitting there saying, oh yeah, it's the consumer's fault. This is the reason why this is melting. No, it's not. It's not the consumer's fault. It's the manufacturer's fault. They didn't individualize each pin. They put it on a bus bar. And then they tied in the pins to that bus bar. That's the problem. Right there in the nutshell. Is because now you might have a pin that pulls more power than another pin. You might have a lead on your GPU that's going to pull more power than the other pins. You don't know that. That's the reason why they were individualized in the first place, off of the 8-pin. So that's the reason why you're getting the melting issues in the same frickin' spot every time, is because one pin is pulling more power than the other pins. The power is not balanced out on your GPU. It's not balanced. They don't have balancing transistors in there. They're not balancing the power, the 12 volt power that's coming in. There's your problem there, Junior. So, I really wish when it comes to electronics, and if you don't know how electronics work, then you're not giving a fair assessment to what's going on. Okay? How I know about electronics is because I've been working with electronics for years. I've been doing repairs with electronics for years. And the problem is that there's an imbalance between one or two of the pins on the GPU that are pulling more power than the rest of the pins. That's the reason why it's melting, is because now you get the power balance between all the pins coming in. So if one pin's pulling more power than the other pin, guess what happens? It's gonna melt it. And that's where the imbalance is. Everybody never talked about it. They never looked at that factor. That's what really makes me think that, if they actually paid attention to what each individual pin was pulling for power. No, they didn't. It's because they get that bus bar that goes across, so all power is being pulled off of one lead. Even though you got small leads coming in, it's off that bus bar, and then the leads on your graphics card are not going to pull all the same power. That's the reason why they had it individually wired, is because each one of those wires pull more current than the next. Each pin pulls different powers, unless it's balanced through balancing transistors. You got transistors that are like, let's say like the VRM MOSFET transistors, having the power incoming balance the power all the way across the board to each one of the components. That's fine. You can do something like that. But what happens is that the power is being pulled in from different leads, different positive leads that's coming off of the graphics card, which is leading to different components first. Do the math. Guarantee if you measure the amount of amps that are being pulled off of one pin on the graphics card side and see why it's pulling that much power, you'll see the problem is right staring you in the face. and putting all of it on a bus bar, you're never going to find that problem. It's just a reoccurring problem that's going to keep going and going and going. The problem is on the graphics card. It's pulling too much power from a single pin, causing that pin to catch fire. So find out why that pin is pulling that much power and it's not balanced between all the pins. You putting that bus bar across there. I'll tell you my thought about that at the end. I'm just giving you a little bit of what my thoughts are now. But at the end, let's go ahead and go to Micro Center and then we'll finish through. And as we can see, the pricing of this week has not really changed much at Micro Center as last week. There's still the same pricing going across the board. In store. This is in store for these graphics cards. You can buy these in store. Now, buying it off their site for shipping, they got something there that's for shipping too. Let me hit accept on that. Like here, if you go in store, you can get a 4080 Super. It's the gigabyte version for $9.99. Not a bad price. I mean, 4080 Super for $9.99. As long as they fix the one little issue that Gigabyte has on those cards, I don't see why it's a bad card. There's a reason why I say that, because I've seen many videos on the fact of that foot, that locking foot breaking off, and it's breaking off the traces to inside the GPU and causing it not to work, and then has to be repaired and everything else. That's just becoming a legacy with Gigabyte. I haven't seen it with Asus yet, believe it or not. I have not seen it with Asus on that foot part. I got an Asus card, Asus built card. It's an NVIDIA, but it's an Asus built PCB, and I haven't seen it break off yet. PNY's got one for $9.99. Asus has got the 4080 Super Tough for $9.99. The 4070 Super they got for $6.50. Looks like they got 4070 Super, Ti Super. Truthfully, the prices on these are a little bit rich for my blood when it comes to, the graphics card. But they got a 4070 Super here for $600. When the 4070 came out, it was $600. The 4070 Super is $600. But now you can get the 4070 for $550, and you can get the 4070 Super for $50 more. Good deal. You can get, if you want to buy a 4070 Super. Which they're not bad cards. It's just that power connector. I just don't care for the power connector. If they would have put on the 4070 Super 2 8-pin connectors, I might have bought the 4070 Super if they put the 2 8-pin connectors. No, they put the 12-volt high power connector on it. I would never buy that graphics card. No matter if it pulls less amount of power or not, I'm not going to risk the fact of that you can't stick it in your case because you can't bend the end of the connector. Not like you can with an 8-pin. 8-pin has individual pins connected with wires. Individual pins. They're not bridged like they got it with that 12-volt high power connector. And yeah, I know I'm still going off about that, but you know what? You need to understand. You need to know the reason why I don't like it. And I'm telling you the reason why. And if you want to take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, then go right ahead. But I can tell you, you're going to run into problems sooner or later, and you want to avoid problems. This is the reason why everybody's saying, well, go with AMD. It's because they use the 8-pin connectors on the GPUs. They don't use that 12-volt high-power connector. They use the 8-pin connectors. If you've noticed, they've had not one, but two, but three. Some GPUs got 4 8-pin connectors on it. 4. So AMD's doing it right when it comes to individualizing the power. They see where the problem is, and they don't want to run into that problem. So they make sure they know how much power that card's pulled pulling at overclocking speeds, they want to make sure that you have enough 8-pin connectors in there to pull that power for overclocking speeds. So it might look crazy if you got 3 or 4 8-pin connectors on your GPU. They're like, well, why do we need all of them? You need all of them for the simple fact if the card's going to pull 300 to 400 watts, you want at least 3 to 4 connectors. I mean, if they put 4 8-pin connectors on a GPU and it pulls 400 watts, each one of those connectors are going to give you at least 150 watts of wiggle room on each one of them. So it's never going to catch fire. And plus you ain't got to worry about the end. You can bend it any way you want, because the wires inside there are stranded. They're not, it's not a solid wire, it's stranded. So if you break one strand, it's not going to hinder the graphics card. So moving on down the road. See, they got the 4070 dual, same one I got right here for $560. Why I like the 2-fan compared to the 3-fan, 2-fan seems to be just as good, keeping down the heat and everything else if you got the proper case. They seem to be the better of the best of the best of the two. So 4060 Ti, 8 gigabyte, $400. You know, the 16 gigabytes going to be close to $500. So that's the reason why that, you know, AMD come out with the 7600 XT, which is way lower in price. What, $330 for 16 gigabytes. Difference is what you have to look at when it comes to 4060 Ti, and if I were to look at, you know, the 7600 XT, if this was the 16 gigabyte one, still be the same amount, you know. In actuality, what you would be looking for, well, we don't have to do that, is the bus rate that would be on the 4060 Ti, which you know is going to be higher than the bus rate that's going to be on the 7600 XT. If you got the 16 gigabyte version of the 4060 Ti and they were the same price, you all would be buying the 4060 Ti 16 gigabytes compared to the 7600 XT. Guarantee it. Because the bus rate's different. The speed will be different. You know. But NVIDIA hasn't caught on to that yet. Obviously, they like keeping prices high, but if they brought the price down just for, let's say, a limited time to give everybody a shot at buying the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte to match up with the 7600 XT. But as far as with performance-wise, the 4060 Ti 16 gigabytes definitely going to probably take the lead on that one. So you all get the good idea and what's going on here at Micro Center. If you got one close to you, make sure you drop in and give them a shout out and say, hey, JJ from JJ's PC Build sent you. Would be appreciated. So let's go back to the main screen. Okay, final thought. Looking at today, I'm already seeing the prices starting to go up on certain high-powered GPUs and mid-level GPUs. Okay, so you might as well say the 4060 Super and up, and you might as well say the 7700 XT and up. The prices are starting to rise. Slowly, just slowly, so you don't really see it. But when I did the pricing last week for the month of May, I already seen some prices started to rise. As we're getting closer to the next generation pop out coming from NVIDIA, everything's gonna start rising up. Okay, I'm gonna spend this couple minutes with you. I know this is gonna be a long video, so I'm gonna spend this couple minutes with you saying, I want you guys to understand this. When I mention something, it's because I know something. I'm not mentioning it because I don't know it. and comes to that high powered connector, they didn't check everything. I seen all the videos that everybody did on that high power connector and their thoughts, and but they still missed the same point. They didn't test every pin on the amperage that's being pulled from the graphics card side. They didn't do it. They didn't see what each pin was pulling, why it was actually melting. If you know it and you do car audio, just to say, if you pull too much amperes from your amplifier and it's pulling too much amperes because it's getting ready to pop, what happens to the fuse? The fuse pops when you pull over the amount rated amps. Same thing is happening with that high power connector. It's only going to be rated to a certain amount of amps and boom, it quits. But where they made the mistake is that they ran all the pins together on one bus instead of running them individually. Each wire individually, and they would never have been into this issue right now. All they had to do is run them individually. All they had to do was change the pin connector to a more solid pin connector. And also test the amount of amperes that's being pulled off of each positive pin, which they didn't do. Okay, now if you're starving your GPU by not having a thick enough wire and it holding enough to where it can pull the amps, you're just starving your GPU. That's pretty much what's happening, is that any electronic piece is only going to pull the amount of power that it needs. It's not going to pull more or less unless it's going to burn out. If it's getting to the point of burning out, then it's going to pull more than its rated recommendations. Each one of those pins, if they were designed to hold 10 amps a piece, and your GPU is pulling like 20 to 30 to almost 40 amps off of that one pin, then what is it going to do to what's in between the bus bar and the pin itself? It's going to heat up. So instead of everybody thinking that it's the consumer's fault, maybe they should have thought about testing the amount of amperes that's coming off of the GPU side that's pulling it from the pin. So keep that in mind. You could use my suggestion if you want to, but that's my suggestion to you to fix this 12 volt high power connector problem. But I can tell you what you need to do is you need to change the pin structure and make it like the 8 pin connectors, and you need to make the wires thicker. The wires that you're using are too thin. 26 gauge ain't gonna cut it. 22 gauge ain't gonna cut it. 16 to 18 gauge, yeah. The inside of the insulation, not the outside of the insulation. You got your OT and you got your ID. If your inner diameter is not 16 gauge, then you're over pulling the amount of amperage off of each wire. When you tie them all together like that, that doesn't mean that you're going to get one big positive connection. Because if you took all the positive wires and you put them all together into one lump sum, it's not even close to 25 amps that you can pull off of that connector. 25 amps. I know, I've already done this. I've already had this look. I've already looked at the 12 volt high power connector. I've already took and put all the wires together and seen that the OD and the ID, you don't have enough strands in that ID to carry that amount of amperes that's being pulled from that GPU. So keep that in mind. And especially when it's pulling more power off of one pin than it is all the rest of the pins. And it seems to be right in that same spot every time. So that tells me it's manufactured. They got they got either one or two pins that are pulling more power than they should be, than the rest of them. They all should be pulling equal amount of power. Then that bus bar thing would have worked. Then you would have never had this melting kind of issue. But it seems that it's the GPU. That's where the problem is. It's because it's pulling too much power off of 1 or 2 pins, causing them to overheat, and boom, there's your problem. You think it's pulling power and putting that bus bar in there is not going to balance it. It's going to cause an imbalance. It's going to cause friction. And that's exactly what happened. So this is a manufacturer. This is not consumer. But anyway, I've said my piece and I spent my time. And if you made it to the end of the video, make sure you subscribe. Put a like on the video. And also, too, don't forget to hit that notification bell. But until the next time and the next video, you know what it is. And I'll see you on the next one.